just received my new copy of the new 2024 Player's Handbook for Dungeons & Dragons. And today I want to flip through and give you some first impressions. Spoiler alert, I think I like it. But before we crack open this book and flip through it, I want to mention that my Patreon and my UPWORK are both live. If you want early access to my videos or you want to request a video topic, check out my Patreon. And if you're looking for manuscript critiques, video editing, graphic design, and marketing, head on over to my UPWORK. The links are both down below. And if you want to play in a D&D game run by me, head on over to startplaying.games and join one of my sessions for as little as $15. That's about how much it would cost you to go to the movies, but instead you get a custom story built for you by me. You can hire me for a custom game, join one of my bi-weekly sandbox campaigns, or join my weekly Strixhaven game. And if you just want to dip your toes in before committing to a full campaign, check out my fairy tale-inspired one-shot, The Enchanted Forest, which launches today. Click the link below to see available dates. So let's get into it. The first thing I'm noticing when looking at the table of contents is they've moved a lot of the rules stuff ahead of the character options, whereas in the old one it started with the character options. So I think that makes it a little more accessible for new players. I'm also seeing that they've included some of the options from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, like the psionic options, so I'm really excited about that. It's a little funny to me that they put species after classes, but I've always thought it was in a weird order, because when I make characters, I always go background, then race, then class, because I think that that's the easiest way, and that's just not how either of the books is set up. Speaking of backgrounds, it looks like we've got some new ones like Guard, Guide, Scribe, Wayfarer, so that's pretty cool. I'm trying to just flip through and not really read, but looking at Chapter 1, it looks like they do a pretty decent job explaining the rules. They're pretty succinct, and they use a lot of graphics, which makes it easier. I also love some of this new art, like this one that explains different results based on the dice. Or I love this one that compares the players to the characters. They have a few different pieces of art like this in the first chapter. I love this one when they're talking about playing on a grid. Here's another good one where they're comparing the characters to the players. I love that right here at the beginning of Chapter 2, this piece of art references the 80s cartoon, which is really cool. It looks like they've given us a new character sheet as well in this book, and looking at the layout, I'm not convinced that this is enough room for things like features. I think that they've kind of given us a smaller box than they could, but they've also kind of simplified it a little bit, whereas the other character sheet I think looks a lot more intimidating for somebody who doesn't know what any of that stuff means. It looks like on page 36, they give you guidance on how to create a balanced party. So it starts with cleric, fighter, rogue, and wizard, and then kind of allows you to swap out those classes. So for example, it says that in that lineup, you could replace the fighter with the barbarian, monk, paladin, or ranger. I don't remember there being any kind of guidance like that in the other book, and that's something that players ask me about a lot, so I like that they've included it. I'm going to be doing some follow-up videos about this. Like I said, I'm not really reading all of the stuff about the rules in here, so there might be stuff that I'm not noticing that is significant that's changed, and I'll be making further videos talking about that. Now we get into classes, and one of my favorite things about tabletop games is the character options, so I'm really excited to see how they've updated them. And this is where I'm going to whip out my very well-loved 2014 Player's Handbook, because I want to do some comparing and contrasting between the classes. Now at first, I tried to list off everything that was different about every class, and then I started to realize that that video was going to get long. So eventually I want to do videos actually comparing each class individually from the 2014 version to the 2024 version. But until then, on this flip through, I'm just going to give you a basic overview of the things that I noticed, the things that stick out to me. Immediately looking at the first class, which is the Barbarian, I'm noticing that they've made everything a little more graphic and a little more easy to understand, which seems to be a trend throughout this book. Like a lot of the information here and over here has just been reduced to this little box right here. It looks like they've also gotten rid of a lot of the flavor text, whereas the old book had paragraphs and sections of flavor text. This book just includes a paragraph for each class. I do sort of miss it, but it is a lot of unnecessary words that they throw in. As I'm comparing them, I'm already seeing a difference to the Barbarian's Rage. The 2014 version specifies that it has to be a weapon attack. The new 2024 version allows for unarmed strikes. There's also, it mentions this weapon mastery thing, but I think that that's just a mechanic that is not tied to Barbarian specifically, so we'll get to that later. I'm noticing that they've reduced Feral Instinct, which Barbarians get at level 7. They removed this paragraph from the 2014 version that says, additionally, if you are surprised at the beginning of combat and aren't incapacitated, you act normally on your first turn. but only if you enter your rage before doing anything else on that turn. So they've removed that part. So now Feral Instinct just gives them advantage on initiative rolls, which is okay. They added Instinctive Pounce, which I think is really cool. As a part of the bonus action you take to enter your rage, you can move up to half your speed. That's pretty cool. Barbarians get that at level 7 in the new book. The more that I look at it, it looks like they've added a lot of new features. And that's something I read about before doing this. I read an article about how this book is supposed to be backwards compatible with the old one, but all of the classes are more powerful. And looking at the Barbarian class, I can already really see that. If I had two Barbarians at the same table, and one of them was using the 2014 version, and one of them was using the 2024 version, this one would definitely be more powerful, and I could see that causing a lot of problems. Also, there's the implications for adventures, because they are balanced with players of that level in mind, but with the new book, those players are going to be more powerful. So when we're using the 2024 rules, but using an older adventure, we're going to have to kind of update it and make the monsters a little stronger, I think. As far as Barbarian subclasses, they've kept the Path of the Berserker. It seems that they've updated the Path of the Totem Warrior to be this Path of the Wild Heart, and they've given them spells like Beast Sense and Speak with Animals that solidify their connection to animals. They've added this Path of the World Tree, which I think is new. It involves them tapping into the powers of Yggdrasil, the World Tree, and the Path of the Zealot from Xanathar's Guide to Everything is back. Moving on to Bards, I love the fact that they've added dance as a possibility for them. Ginny D did a whole video about that, so go check that out. But also in her video, she talks about how because bards can now use dance, they can also do things like acrobatics, capoeira, gymnastics. What's that thing where they spin with the fire? Oh, this is cool. So they've added the spell list directly into the class, which I think is a cool change because on the old player's handbook, with them all being in one place, it can kind of be a little confusing for a new player to figure out what list they're supposed to be looking at. I mean, obviously there's headings, but it's still so much easier to just include it as part of the class. That's also what they did for the Artificer in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. They just had the spell list right there. And that was different because there was only one class in that book, but still, I think that that's a good change. For the Bard subclasses, they've added the College of Dance. Again, they've revamped the College of Glamour from Xanathar's and I guess made this chick a rock star. And then we have the Colleges of Lore and Valor, which are from the original Player's Handbook. Moving on to Clerics, we have to address something that I think is weird about this book. They've updated it so now all classes get their subclass at level 3, which on the surface sounds like it makes sense. But when you think about it, for Clerics, Sorcerers, and Warlocks, this change is a little weird. Clerics get their magic from a god, though now you don't necessarily know which god until level 3. Sorcerers get their magic from their bloodline, but now you don't necessarily know which bloodline until level 3. And Warlocks get their magic from their patron, but now they don't necessarily know what patron until level 3. Are you with me on this? And once again, Ginny D has done a video about this. She did a whole video about the implications for Warlocks with that, and I highly recommend checking out the video. She did an amazing job, and Warlocks are my favorite class. We'll get to them later. But yeah, I just think this change is a little funny, and Clerics happen to be the first victim. Speaking of classes getting the same thing at certain levels, it seems all of them are getting an epic boon at level 19. It says to see chapter 5 for that, so we'll get to that later. But it does for each class have a recommendation of which boon you should pick, which is pretty cool. I just think that makes it easier for new players. I also see another problem with Clerics that I think is going to be relevant, especially for Wizards. They've made it now where all classes have 4 subclass options. So for Cleric, all we get is Life, Light, Trickery, and War. This is compared to the 7 that they had in the 2014 version. I think it makes sense to want them to all have the same amount of subclasses, but some of them just need more, like Clerics. So that's, I think, my first big disappointment of this book, is where the hell are the rest of the Cleric subclasses? I mean, are we going to be getting another book with that stuff soon? Because, also, I don't have the money to be buying these D&D books all the time. I mean, I know you can find them online or whatever, but shh, don't tell them. Moving on to the Druid, I'm noticing a change to their wild shape. In the new 2024 version, you actually choose a certain number of wild shapes that you can learn, rather than just having the list of like any animal below a certain CR. And I think while this is kind of limiting, the limit is actually helpful. A lot of the Druids in my games have always suffered from not knowing what animal to turn into, and so they just kind of underuse their wild shape. A lot of the time it only gets used if they're like, I'm gonna sneak in here, so I'm gonna turn into a spider. I mean, that's usually it. So I think having them pre-selected and maybe even including those stat blocks with your character sheet would make things so much easier. They've also taken away the limitation on swim speeds, so straight away when you get your wild shape, you can turn into something that can swim, which is a big change from the 2014 version. You do still have to wait until level 8 to turn into an animal with a fly speed, but you can turn into any animal with a swim speed as long as you have them pre-selected. For Druid subclasses, we get the Circle of the Land and the Circle of the Moon from the original Player's Handbook. We get the Circle of the Stars back from Tasha's, which I really love because I love this subclass. No one in my games has ever played it, but I just think it's so cool. And we get the Circle of the Sea, which I think is new. I don't recognize that subclass. Fighters, I don't have a ton to say about it. They got some updates, but nothing that particularly sticks out to me. I'm not the biggest fan of fighters. I know they're strong, but I feel like that's all they have going for them. Who knows, maybe when I actually read this book I'll like fighters more. For subclasses, we still get the Battlemaster Champion and Eldritch Knight from the original Player's Handbook. By the way, this Eldritch Knight art reminds me of Lineage 2. Anyone ever played that? Is it just me? Look at him. And then they've added the Psi Warrior from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. I mentioned earlier that they added the psionic options, and I think that that's really cool. I just don't see why we should be limited to arcane magic when psionics exist in D&D. For monks, they've simplified the monk weapons a little bit. Now it's all simple weapons and martial weapons with the light property, which before it was short swords, and then I already told them I have it next to me. Short swords and any simple melee weapons that don't have the two-handed or heavy property. So it's just a little simpler in the new version. Now instead of Way of, we get Warrior of for monks, so that's kind of cool. Doesn't seem as peaceful and monkey to me. Monkey? That's not what I meant to say. You get what I mean. So we still have Shadow, Open Hand, and now Elements instead of Way of the 4 elements. We just get Warrior of Elements. And then we get the Warrior of Mercy, which is based on the Way of Mercy from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. Can I just say, Tasha's Cauldron of Everything is probably my favorite 5th edition book, so I'm really excited that it got some love in this new 2024 Player's Handbook. But now we move on to the Paladin. Now, I also think it's weird that Paladins choose their subclass at level 3, but that's always been the case. So whatever. I just think it makes more sense to choose your Oath at level 1. Whatever. One thing that sticks out to me is that at level 5 they now get Faithful Steed, which just makes them have Find Steed prepared all the time, I guess. So okay. I just think that's a weird thing to add. For subclasses, we still get the 3 from the Player's Handbook, Devotion, Ancients, and Vengeance. And then we get the Oath of Glory from both Mythic Odyssey of Theros and Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. Also, I love this old lady. She's so cool. You don't see enough of that in fantasy art. Moving on to the Ranger. This is one that I'm really excited to see because I know that with this book they were trying to take traditionally underpowered classes like the Ranger and kind of boost them up a little bit. But they also boosted up everybody else. So I feel like they're still going to be underpowered. Favorite enemy, now instead of them choosing a favorite enemy, they get Hunter's Mark, which is kind of cool, but I also like the favorite enemy mechanic. So for subclasses, they get the Beastmaster and the Hunter from the original, as well as the Gloomstalker from Xanathar's and the Fey Wanderer from Tasha's. One big thing I'm noticing about the Beastmaster is that they've added stat blocks for your animal companion. You can choose a Beast of the Land, Beast of the Sky, or Beast of the Sea. Honestly though, I'm still a little underwhelmed by the Beastmaster. I mean, I think it's cool. I've always thought it was a cool concept, but just on paper, mechanically, just like in the 2014 version, I can see where they would fall behind at higher levels. Rogues seem to be just as overpowered as they were before. Sneak attack is unchanged, and they've added a bunch of stuff like they did with the other classes. For subclasses, they get the 3 from the Player's Handbook, the Thief, the Assassin, and the Arcane Trickster, as well as they get the psionic option, the Soul Knife, from Tasha's. For sorcerers, one weird thing that sticks out to me is they get spears now. That's kind of cool. They get the Draconic and Wild Magic subclasses from the original Player's Handbook, as well as Aberrant Sorcery and Clockwork Soul, which are both from Tasha's. The metamagic options look slightly more streamlined because they actually include the amount of sorcery points that each one takes. Finally, we've made it to Warlocks. This is my favorite class, as I mentioned earlier. I'm seeing that they've changed up the table for Eldritch Invocations, so you get 1 at level 1 instead of getting them at level 2 like you used to, and you get more of them overall. Warlocks now prepare spells, which I think is interesting. I mean, I just feel like you've got certain spells that your patron has given you, so I think that it made more sense before, but whatever. The subclasses are now Archfey, Celestial, Fiend, and Great Old One, Celestial being from Xanathar's Guide, and the rest of them being from the original. Warlocks kind of fall into the same thing, where I think that they need more subclasses because you might make your patron with anything. So I think it makes sense to add on the Fathomless Warlock, the Genie Warlock, the Undying Warlock, the Hexblade Warlock. I just think it makes sense. And the Wizard. Everyone always hates when I say this, but to me, Wizards have always been a very straightforward class. They don't really get a lot from their class, they just get a shit ton of spells. It seems that's basically still the case. I mean, they've added a couple things, but mostly you just get spells. And once again, I'm bitter about the amount of subclasses we get. We now get the Abjurer, Diviner, Evoker, and Illusionist. This is compared to the 8 that they used to have. One that I think is notably missing is the Necromancer. Necromancers don't get any love around here? What the hell? But anyway, that's it on classes for now. Like I said, I want to go back and do videos actually comparing each class individually, and I think that that'll be a little more in-depth, and once I've had a chance to actually read the book. So then we get to Chapter 4, Character Options. I already like the background so much more. Look at this. They've kind of streamlined them, and each one has its own picture, and then like a little paragraph of flavor text. I think that this is so... Look at this. This is the 2014 version. Versus this? I mean, come on, this is such a glow up. And then, like I said earlier, we've got some new ones. We've got the Farmer, the Guard, the Guide. They've added Artisan and Merchant instead of the Guild option that they used to have. We get Scribe, Wayfarer. As far as races, they've added Aasimar, Goliath, and Orc as options. Half-elves and half-orcs are notably missing, which is a little disappointing. I just feel like I was expecting them to add more options and not really take away, and it seems that they did take away. Like, are they gonna do that shit that 4th edition did, where there's a player handbook 2 and a player handbook 3? I'm gonna be pissed. And I guess what they're saying is that it's backwards compatible and we still could use the old ones, but there's issues with that because, say for example, I want to use the Circle of Spores Druid. Already I'm running into issues because Druids used to get their subclass at level 2, and now they get it at level 3, and so at what level do I get those features? And already we have a situation where there's not a solution in rules as written. Your DM is going to have to rule on it. And I think if we can reduce those situations where the DM is having to rule on something like that, it's better. You run into less disagreements and everything. This is cool. They've added a kid in a wheelchair here. This is it. The flavor text up here says that this is in Ravenloft, so I don't know if that's based on the books. You tell me. I don't know. But this kid is in a wheelchair. That's pretty cool. It seems that they've divided feats into 4 categories. So we have origin feats, general feats, fighting styles, and epic boons. At first glance, I'm not too sure the difference between origin feats and general feats. I mean, there's certain situations where the book will be like, take a general feat, so like, I guess that's the difference, but I don't really understand what it means. Maybe that's because I'm not reading this book. I don't know. It makes sense to me that they've taken fighting styles and put them all in one place instead of listing them in each class like they used to. I just think that this is more streamlined and efficient. And I'm really intrigued by these epic boons that I mentioned earlier. Every class gets an epic boon at level 19, and each one recommends which one you should pick. The only issue with this is how many players actually make it to 19th level. I just feel like this is a part of the game that I think is cool, but I'm probably never actually going to use. On the next chapter, we get to equipment, and this is where we actually talk about the weapon mastery that I mentioned earlier. Basically, they've added 8 mastery properties: Cleave, Graze, Nick, Push, Sap, Slow, Topple, and Vex. And the table tells you which one goes with each weapon. So if you have the weapon mastery feature from your class, you can use that property. So for example, the Rapier's mastery property is Vex. So basically, if you have weapon mastery with a rapier, and you hit a creature and deal damage to it, you have advantage on your next attack roll against that creature before the end of your next turn. So they're just these extra little features that your weapons can have if you're really good with them. I know older editions have done this before, but I love that they have included all pictures of all of the weapons. Not everybody knows what a halberd is, or a glaive, or a lance, and so being able to refer to this is super helpful. They've also done the same thing with armor, so I think that that's less of a problem. I mean, it looks like armor. It is still helpful to have. The next chapter is spells, and it is fucking long. At some point I might do a video specifically about spells and comparing them from 2014 to 2024, But for now, I just want to pick out a few of the iconic ones and see what the differences are. Okay, so looking at Fireball, it looks like they've barely changed it. The only difference I'm seeing is they no longer specify that the flames can go around corners, which seems like a weird thing to cut, but whatever. But let's look at a cantrip now. Maybe Magic Missile. Magic Missile is like basically word for word the same. Oh, as I'm flipping through the spell section, I see that they've added Ice Knife. That was from Xanathar's, I think, and I love that spell. But how about a non-combat spell? Like, let's look at Disguise Self. I mean, it's basically the same too, but one thing that I do think is interesting is that they've changed this part. Here's what it says in the 2024 version. You make yourself, including your clothing, armor, weapons, and other belongings on your person, look different until the spell ends. Now here's what it says in the 2014 version. You make yourself, including your clothing, armor, weapons, and other belongings on your person, look different until the spell ends, or until you use your action to dismiss it. So am I crazy? Can you not dismiss Disguise Self early anymore? You're just disguised for 10 minutes, no matter what? Obviously this is just a quick look at the spells, and I only checked 3 of them, but it seems that they're basically the same with maybe some minor tweaks. Let me know if you'd like to see a video comparing the spells, or if there are any particular spells that you'd like to see the difference between. Like, they're literally the rest of this book is spells. Finally, we get to Appendix A, which is the multiverse. Look at this in the 2014 version versus this. Like, this is so much better. I think the other one is perhaps a little more succinct, but this is beautiful. Like, who did this? This one also actually makes each outer plane look like a place. The 2014 version just has a little symbol for each one, which, if you don't know anything about that plane, it doesn't mean anything. Appendix B, they've got some creature stat blocks. I would die for this cat. I don't know if this is from something, but I'm obsessed with this little guy, a Sphinx of Wonder. I gotta get one of those. And then for Appendix C, they have like a rules glossary. It's just got like a bunch of different terms and what they mean. And that's it. We flipped through the whole book. So what are my first impressions? 1, it seems like every class has something to be excited about. 2, there were some kind of questionable changes to subclasses. Mainly that every class gets 4 options and picks their subclass at level 3, even when they should have more options, or they should know from level 1 what their subclass is. 3, the entire book seems more newbie-friendly to me. The graphics make things simpler, and they've trimmed down a lot of the text. 4, it could be backwards compatible with the 2014 version, but keep in mind that players using the 2024 version will be way more powerful. 5, at first glance, the spells seem relatively unchanged. They've added some of the ones from other books, but I don't know without taking a closer look. Overall, I think I like it. Every time that there's a new edition of D&D, people push back. Nobody wants to change editions, nobody wants to go out and buy a bunch of extra books. But overall, I think that this is a change for the better. And there's certain things as a DM where I'd be willing to meet in the middle between the 2 versions of the Player's Handbook. I can't imagine that I'm choosing between the 2 of these. I think that this is just another addition to my D&D. Addition with an A. I'm considering another book like Xanathar's or Tasha's, which might change how I play, but generally it's still the same game. And maybe as I read this book, I'll change my mind. And like I said, I'm planning to do a lot of follow-up videos talking about this new book and the differences that I see as I actually read through. But that's all I've got for you today. I hope that you enjoyed this. I hope that I helped you make up your mind whether or not you like this new 2024 Player's Handbook. And let me know if you have any questions about the new rules. Bye.